Hi, my name's Jacqueline Petrozelli, and today I'm here with Ken Berger, the Managing Director and Chief Educator of Algorhythm. Thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I'm sure that a lot of your insight will help the faculty and the students here with their research and as they engage in the practitioner community. So first, I just wanted to ask, how did you get involved with the service sector?
I was a kid that was raised in an affluent family, and my parents wanted me to make a lot of money, and I rebelled and decided I didn't want to do that, and I wanted to give back and wanted to work with the poor. And so I dedicated my career to that, and started out thinking that I'd be a therapist, but then discovered that poor people had more pressing needs than my middle-class therapy skills. And so then I decided to start running, working in and then running NGOs dedicated to serving the underserved, people of low income. And I spent about 20 years serving the homeless and then other populations in need in human services and in healthcare before I went to a place called Charity Navigator. And then Charity Navigator, which was about 7 years ago, has as its mission to be a guide to intelligent giving, and it is a website that rates the performance of NGOs, U.S. registered NGOs, but they serve countries around the world, on a series of measurements currently having to do with the finances as well as the governance practices of these NGOs. And they're also working now towards what I call measuring what matters most, which is asking the NGOs to describe how they report their results or their outcomes. So that's what I did up till about 6 months ago. And then I joined Algorhythm 2 months ago. So that means that I'm dangerous in what I can tell you about Algorhythm and my knowledge. But Algorhythm is really dedicated. It's also a data platform, a digital organization, a data science company, and it's dedicated to what they call democratizing impact measurement, or another way to say it is providing the skills for small and mid-sized as well as large NGOs to be able to measure their outcomes, measure the results of their work, and show that they are truly meeting their mission. So these cloud-based tools are developed by Algorhythm with the help of social science researchers and data scientists, and they look at each particular type of cause area, do a deep dive into what the field of practice research shows are models of best practice, and then build these kind of tools to help NGOs to improve and to become more effective at delivering the services and meeting their mission.
Great. Does the work you do with Algorhythm kind of fulfill that purpose that drove you towards the service sector in the first place?
Big time. I mean, 30 years of direct service practice, and then 7 years judging NGOs, making judgments, and getting yelled at a lot. And now coming back to helping organizations to be more effective, I'm much happier on this side of the pond.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. I was wondering if you could maybe take us into a little bit more of the practical, what your typical day looks like at Algorhythm.
Well, for one thing, because we're a very digital company, we have staff in the United States as well as in Colombia, in California, all over the country. My office is my den. So my commute every day is 5 steps from the bedroom to the den. I find that it's very important that I begin each day with a calendar and with a to-do list, and rank ordering my priorities, and then plucking them into my calendar for the day and structuring the day, because if I don't structure it, there's no structure otherwise. And it's not that I get to everything that I put on the list, but at least I'm aspirational. I mean, there's pesky realities of the day that interrupt, but That's how I go through the day. And my job at Algorhythm, the chief educator part of my job, entails a lot of writing and public speaking, and so I build time in for that. A lot of calls, Skype calls, meetings in New York City, because I live near New York City, so that part of the company, and of course since New York City has more NGOs per square inch than anywhere else in the world, it can keep me busy. So that sort of is a nutshell of what a day is like, writing, meetings, planning, and then also explaining to people how they can be helped to become more effective.
So besides maybe learning some organizational skills, what are some other skills and perspectives that students who are interested in getting involved with this sector might want to train or hone themselves on?
Well, I think I have to answer that question with just making one basic point, which is I think that the NGO sector is so diverse and so complex that it's very hard to make too many universal statements. And so now that I've said that, I'll make some universal statements. But I do think one of the things that I learned at Charity Navigator in answering that question that I think is really important is this realization that there is a small number of very large NGOs and an enormous number of small and mid-sized NGOs. And so depending on where you go at first and then later on, partly determines what skills you need. So, for example, if you decide you want to begin by working for a small NGO, the cool part of it is you'll have an incredible diversity of work. And so the skills required, I could give you a long list for in that case. And so that's the cool part. The not so cool part is that you're probably going to make next to nothing or do it as a volunteer, so get ready for that trade-off. And then also the other not cool part is because you have very limited resources, you're often in crisis mode, you're often in a very resource-constrained situation. But, like I said, you have this range of opportunity to learn and grow. And so at the other end of the spectrum, if you go for a larger organization, then the likelihood of the skills required, at least initially, is much more narrow, and the expertise required is much more focused, and your range of authority and growth, perhaps, is more limited in that sense. But, you also can get deep knowledge there, and you can pay your bills and your student loans and everything else much more easily, potentially, relatively speaking. Although the NGO sector doesn't pay anywhere near typically as the for-profit sector. But the universal, if you're lucky, is a sense of satisfaction that you're doing good, if you're lucky, which is a whole other story. But so now getting to your question, now that I put it in context, I think one of the most important things in the social sector, especially if you're doing direct service, is people skills, is an ability to listen. And I think that's going to become increasingly the case as we try to move more and more towards respecting, empowering, and engaging the people being served in the process, listening as well as talking and thinking about things. So that skill is critically important, especially in direct service. I think there's something that you can't be trained into. There are two things that you can't be trained into, but I believe are of critical importance. One is that you have common sense, and just basic practical. When you have a situation on the ground, just using your common sense to come to the quickest, best solution is a skill that's invaluable. And unfortunately, it seems to be in short supply oftentimes. And then the other one, which also is of this nature, is integrity and ethics, personal ethics. I think that you can't train people to be honest, and I don't think. And so I think that a lot of people that go into the NGO sector have that quality, at least initially. And, but you will encounter situations where your expectations that everyone is altruistic and good-natured are going to be confronted because it's not true. There are some very bad people, like in any other space, and you know, having to confront that reality. But I think, you know, in terms of trainable skills, I certainly think that looking at keeping up with the field of practice and trying to figure out how that can apply in the environment that you're in is very important, and bringing that into the organization, especially since so many NGOs are, even bigger ones, are crisis-oriented and often don't have an opportunity to sort of reflect and look at the bigger picture and look at what are models that can help them. That can be an invaluable resource. And as the new person coming in, you know, you can bring in what's new that you may think from your time at school is pervasive in the field, and then you get there and you find out that it isn't the case because of these other factors. And so you can infuse, that could be a value, a resource that you could provide. Now, it's probably they're going to punch all kinds of holes in it and question it left, right, and center, so you have to be prepared. So that's another skill, which is to have a certain level of tough skin, to be able to really think critically. And you may find that a lot of the knowledge and the research, when you hit the ground, may not apply. So you may also be pushed back on occasion. But the fact that you're testing and you're going there could be, to give a different perspective, could be very valuable. I think, you know, the more that you can be a generalist, because the needs are so great, and the nimble organizations are the ones that are most likely to thrive, so that if you can diversify your skills, if you have a minor in something, or if you have an interest in something, like fundraising, for example, which of course every organization is very interested in, or a willingness to go beyond your particular area of practice is, all of those things are valuable.
Would your answer change at all for, say, a doctoral student like me, or perhaps a master's student who's interested in doing research for an organization?
Sure. I mean, I think, I think there are similarities. The one thing that I would say to a researcher is spend as much time as you can on the ground as a volunteer, however you can do it. Get in there in the trenches and take a look at the trenches, and try to look at whatever there is out there in the field of research that's sensitive to the different sizes of organizations, so that you can be as certain as possible that your research is truly applicable and usable for the majority of the sector. That would be the one guiding theme that I would say for a researcher and somebody that's, you know, a PhD that may be going into academia, is to really do that. Don't just go where the money is, because the money is going to be with big foundations, big NGOs, big government grants. And so even if that's the case, try as much as you can to infuse in those opportunities, build into those opportunities the ability to get down in the trenches where the majority of the sector is.
Great, thank you. So just to wrap up, I was wondering if there was any more advice, tips that you might be willing to offer any students who are watching the interview.
Yeah, so probably one of the most striking things for me in my career was that of the 5 NGOs that I spent a lot of time in 3 of them, the leadership was unethical. And when I compare notes with other people who've done this work, they corroborate. We all have stories, but there's a reluctance to talk about it because there's a fear that if you talk about it, then the donating public would run away. How can we trust you? There's all these bad players. I say that not to dissuade people from doing this work, but just to be ready for bad people doing bad things, and also for having beneficiaries getting angry with some of the ways that some of the organizations you work in operate. So prepare yourself for that. At the same time, treasure how wonderful it really is. Take the time to reflect that you're doing something, probably doing something that is enormously important and helpful, and that, you know, just treasure the good works of the good organizations, and keep that in mind and never give up. And then the last thing I say is, I really believe that the future of the NGO sector is going to have more and more to do with data and measurement. And that is one of the best ways to overcome the corruption and the bad problems, is to get some objective measurement into the sector on the ground. That's part of what Algorhythm's about. It's part of why I'm there. And so I think try to build that into your learning, build that into the way you're thinking about going into the sector, so that you can help to drive that change, so that the organizations and the sector as a whole can truly help the world even more than it does today.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I know I've learned a lot.
Thanks.